So in 2017, when I moved into the role of a senior UX designer full-time, there was a certain glory with the title. You know, you got LinkedIn messages all the time, people inviting you for jobs, you know, and everybody just wanted you, you know. And there we were, with all of our best intentions, wanting to advocate for users' rights. But when we entered complex environments that existed way before digital, right? So some of the banks, you know, and all of the institutions that are really like, you know, good half a century old, fighting for the rights of users was quite a tricky thing to do. So we found ourselves a year to 24 months later feeling quite burnt out. So when I say we, it was myself and a few other designers that I knew. And it was a tough industry to be in. So a friend of mine and an ex-colleague, Brendan, we spoke to other designers and just to verify whether we were having the same experience, right? Were we alone in this, or was it actually happening to other people? And we found that other designers had similar experiences. They struggled with imposter syndrome. They didn't know how to handle so many different stakeholders. They struggled to advocate for UX because nobody really knew what it was, you know? So we then delayed. So in 2021, we got together and we decided that we want to explore this concept of how might we help junior to mid-level designers entering the industry to have like a more grounded experience, to have a better life-work balance. And if we change the phrase work-life balance, before I die, to life-work balance, I will have done my job. So we came up with the concept UXHale, and at that point it didn't have a logo. We actually just, this is all MVP one, minimal viable product that Caitie and I have come up with in the last month together with Lisa. So in exploring the topic, we pinned it down to having to navigate 3 key areas. So the one was navigating our environment, and that is related to the UX maturity of the organization. It's a lot about handling stakeholders. It's understanding what do people understand UX as in your environments. And it's really critical to understand that landscape. The second area had to do with us growing as UX practitioners. So what are you naturally good at? What does your company require? Where is the industry going? So if you love user research, but you hate information architecture, you know, should you really be pushing for the one that you don't like, right? But most importantly, the one that we actually have control over is our perceptions and our internal experience of all of these aspects. So what we then did is we came out here last month. Jay, welcome back. Welcome back, Mela. So we got some feedback from the people that were here last time, and UX frameworks came up as one of the top things that people were interested in, along with imposter syndrome and so on. So we put out a little questionnaire, and these are the top things that came up, because I realized when you say what UX frameworks, it means a lot of different things, right, to different people. So now the thing about lean UX design is you can't really talk about it without talking about design thinking. And you can't really talk about it without talking about Agile, because they work together. So that is why we're here today. So to those of you coming back, thank you for joining us again. So in this shared learning experience, we're going to connect design with business and technology and look at the bigger picture. How do they all fit in together? Because we often get stuck in working with what is directly in front of us, but it really helps to understand the bigger context of where we all fit in. I'm going to introduce design thinking, agile methodology, lean UX, and I think it was very ambitious to try and get that into a 90-minute talk. So this has been the challenge, but at least I hope that you will leave here with a better understanding of the landscape if you are not sure about it. And then we're going to share some practical tools. Caitie will take us through some things you could literally take away today and try and apply tomorrow in your teams. And then we'll play a game. And then hopefully, if I don't talk too long, I'll be able to share an actual case study of a project that we did in 22 and 23 with Lisa and another teammate. Lovely delay. gives me a time to take a breath. So my name is Vicka Petrishko. It sounds very weird. I am from Russia. I've lived a third of my life, no, 1/4 of my life in Russia, 3/4 here. I am a problem solver by nature, and these are things that I can't help. I cannot let a good problem pass me by, sometimes to my own detriment. I am a lover of learning, so I plan to do my master's next year, and I cannot wait. And then I hike, I travel, I dance, I drum. And those are the things I love doing. And a lot of my life is very much defined by my dogs, because I don't leave my house often because of them. Now, what I do today is I'm the founder of a company called Leanseed, and I work together with Caitie. We collaborate, and Lisa and another teammate, Chipiwa. And we work with growing organizations, 3 to 5 years old, that are experiencing the typical challenges of understanding how do you fine-tune your business model? How do you become more human-centric in your customer approach? And so on. So I am learning to facilitate. Here we are together today. And then over to Caitie to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me at the back? We're trying to speak in this volume. Cool. So I'm Caitie. I am a maker. I really love to make things in the physical world because I do spend so much time working in the digital world as well. So I love to sew. I love making pottery. That's actually where Vicka and I met.
Pottery.
I am big on collaboration. I really think that there's a lot of power in working together with people to build something greater than you can just on your own. I've recently become a yoga teacher, which I'm very proud of. And this helps with the kind of grounding things that we're trying to do with you exhale. And I too cannot leave a problem alone. I think that's why we get along. So I do product design, software development. I'm also doing some graphic design. Everything that I do, I try and bring design thinking into it, and try and apply it in spaces where it hasn't traditionally been used. I am a certified project manager, and I do also really love facilitating workshops and helping people get the ideas they have going on in their head out onto paper or maybe a digital post-it note. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Caitie. Okay, so let's talk about the methodologies. So looking at business model design, who would be interested in sharing with me what these 3 circles could represent? Does anyone know?
Feasibility, viability,
Anyone?
desirability.
That is correct. So when you look at products and service design, it's very important to focus on 3 areas, right? One, and we typically begin a business by kind of knowing what it is that we want to solve. We focus on what we can do in terms of resources. So what are we capable of doing? So if you have a problem, can you build an app for it? And of course, there's the financial aspect of it, because in its essence, a business has 2 functions. It needs to deliver value and it needs to remain financially sustainable. Because if you're not delivering value, you're not going to be financially sustainable. So at the heart of this intersection, for those of you who love Venn diagrams, is the ideas that actually end up thriving. And it's businesses that focus on all 3 of these areas at the same time and in parallel, so that they can work out what do people actually need, what are the unmet needs, and then what can we do really well that we don't have to develop competencies that we don't really have, and how can we remain so financially sustainable. And then, of course, there is the aspect of sustainability, but for the purpose of simplicity, we're not going to talk about this today. So when you look at design thinking, so how many of you, by show of hands, have done any courses on design thinking or UX design? Wonderful, that's so amazing. Okay, that's awesome. So it's got a very verbose definition, but in its essence, it's a problem-solving approach, and it's one that is focused on people. It's one that is focused on looking at the business from outside in, or looking at the problem from outside in. And if you want to build a product or a service, ideally you want to figure out how you're going to be gaining a competitive advantage. And that means you have to deliver something that is not already in the market. And that by itself is ill-defined or unknown. And that is where design thinking is amazing. Why we should care about it is because it aligns customer value with business value. So by focusing on our customers, we get to understand what it is that we need to do better. And one of the unique things about design thinking that I love is the more different people you have in a room, the more diverse your perspective is going to be. The broader you're going to understand the problem statement because you've got an engineering perspective, you've got a design perspective or an architectural. So it breaks down silos. The delay. If you can. Anyway, right. So as I mentioned, it focuses on the needs of the people. And not just any people, obviously the people who are experiencing the problem. And so much animation. So, but the real value that allows you to motivate for design thinking in your organization is that it reduces rework and it makes the product development cycle cheaper because you don't go all the way into developing an app and you launch it and then you worry about your social media content. You actually get to understand what your customers need because you are testing with your customers the entire time. So you fail fast and you fail early. You don't have to go all the way to the end in order to realize that you don't have something of value. So and for those of you who have done the courses, this might be a little bit of a bore, but there are many design thinking frameworks, but all of them share 5 essential elements. One is understanding your customers, and that is where we begin. And it's important not to begin with a solution in mind, which is the typical sort of approach we take. We think, oh, I've got this problem. Let's build a website or let's build an app. But what we don't often realize, or we often don't realize, is that the app or whatever the solution is just a medium to deliver the value. And if you don't understand fully what the value that needs to be delivered is, the app I spoke to a company that had spent almost R500,000 or over R500,000 on building an app, and the adoption was really low. And they are solving a needed problem, but unfortunately, it's not tailored to the needs of the user groups, right? So it's really important to go through the first stage so that you can understand your perceived problem and move into understanding the actual problem that your customers are experiencing. Yes, you will be able to view, the recording will be online. So a comment in the chat. And we'll also share a lot of the information in the slides with you if once you've given us feedback in the form at the end of the session. So once we've got the problem redefined, then we begin to explore the ideas and we start to look at how do we best match this problem within our toolkit and within our capabilities. We then prototype it so that we can align all of our stakeholders. And instead of talking about things theoretically, we either draw them out on the board, we sketch them, we do whatever we can to make our idea tangible. And then we go and test it with actual users. But when we work on Leanseed projects in our company, what's really important for me is to divide the discovery phase and the user insights phase, because discovery for me is focused on the inside of the company, while empathy is focused on the outside of the company. So you have to leave your building, you have to understand what's going on outside of whatever you believe it is. And then lastly, once you've done your design and you've gone through your process of designing this concept, somebody is going to have to develop it. So if you think about blueprints of a building that has to be implemented, you have to constantly think about what happens next after you've done the work. And what's really important in this process is that there's got to be involvement from stakeholders and the people who are responsible for the implementation throughout the entire process. So, does anybody feel like sharing which phases your team mostly focuses on, like let's say within the last month? Caitie.
Definitely testing with users.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And that's a rare gem and a privilege to do. Anyone else?
So you're mostly in the prototype and just actual designing phase.
Right. And does that get to the users? And
Sometimes yes, sometimes it's a lot of fighting.
right.
But yes.
So it's a very difficult methodology to kind of descend upon an organization, because organizations are intrinsically kind of interested in their own capabilities and their own so to try and move beyond that, it's like there's a saying, the eyes don't see themselves. So you have to get somebody else to help you see the things that you don't see. So let's talk about Agile. And once again, we're going to run through this. I'm not trying to compete with a good IXDF course. This is high level, just so that we understand the landscape. Now, I've got a good friend on the line, and he actually, I did not know this existed, but he's been a developer since the early 2000s, and he's been doing this for 25 years. And he now runs a company that literally lives the Agile values. So when I began this conversation with him, he kind of showed me this is what Agile has become, right, as a methodology. And most of you who work at banks or bigger organizations are probably looking at these kinds of things that the organization is trying to implement so that they can try and match the startup culture, right, so that they can deliver fast. So there are 3 caveats there. So I don't have a formal qualification in Agile. I have worked in different Agile environments, some of which were fragile, for lack of a better word. And all the things that I'm saying have been tested with my friends and signed off by the Agile sort of guru. So in its essence, Agile was born in response to ongoing change and uncertainty. So if you think about the 20th century, things kind of went at a specific pace, right? So we had the Industrial Revolution, but we were still going at a specific pace. And we were still used to seeing things physically. So you've got if you're building a building, you have the blueprint, and then you do the foundation, and then things happen one after another. Hence the term of waterfall, right? We flow from one to the next. But then with software development, that was a little bit too tricky. Because while you're busy writing these very detailed requirements over 2 years for this massive organization, the environment internally and externally has changed. So by the time that you need to deliver your product, what is happening is you either have to get a lot of changes in and very quickly, and people are burning out because they are working so hard, or you have to go with something that is no longer suitable for the environment. So a bunch of developers got together and they put together the Agile Manifesto. Who has heard of the Agile Manifesto? Right. Good crowd. So what they realized is that in this very complex environment, they had 8 sets of things that were sort of competing with each other. And what they said is, while all 8 of these aspects are very important, they're going to prioritize what is on the other right, on the left. They're going to prioritize what's on the left over what is on the right when there is conflict between the two. Because often we forego the human interaction for the sake of a process. Often we go and say we want comprehensive documentation over having a working model. So they said that in our product development, we're going to honor this. So for more information, Agile Manifesto. So they also came up with 12 principles of the Agile methodology. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but what we invariably recognize looking at this in greater detail at Leanseed is that it's really important for us to remain motivated. That means we take on projects that interest all of us. We don't take on projects that we don't want to do. It's very important for us to have face-to-face communication. So where we can, we get together, but we work remotely. So we always have our cameras on because it adds that human touch. What else? Really important. And at its core, where Agile essentially as a methodology was different is it's supposed to be self-organized teams. It's not supposed to be this massive complex structure, right, of these multiple layers and 20,000 different teams with 20,000 different documents. So would any of you like to share whether any of these values resonate with your team if you are on an Agile team? Who actually practices this day to day? Do you? Wonderful. All of them? Or some of them? Or most of them?
I would say the face-to-face communication these days is difficult. Lots of the calls, firstly, online, and then people don't have their cameras on, which makes it difficult. And self-organized teams can also sometimes be tricky.
That's true.
Yes, I think. But our main focus, to answer your question, the changing requirements, because you're constantly learning, either from the business in terms of what their expectations are, or as people start using your systems, they give you feedback and you get further insights.
And you adapt as you grow, which is amazing. Now, design thinking, sorry, was there another hand?
Oh, it's okay. I was just saying that, yeah, we do as well practice an agile environment in one of my projects. And I'd say like what we've mainly focused on, we do all of these, but what we mainly focus on is like frequent delivery and continuous improvements. But yeah.
It's good to see that. I think sometimes something that is born loses its essence when it is adopted and adapted to other environments. It's really good to see when it does still stay alive. So if we look at the product development cycle, which I'm going to call ST slide. So I took it out because I felt like we might run over time, and then we were chatting earlier on, and she was like, "No, that one from the dry run, we got to." So I put it back. So if we look at the product development cycle and we go from, let's look at design thinking, and let's not go into the detail of what things work like in, once you've got the requirements in the building. So when we're working from not knowing towards knowing, right, and from the start over time, the more effort we put into a product, the higher the cost of change becomes. So to sketch something on a piece of paper versus having a fully fledged app that you take to market before you validate something is quite an investment, right? So, and it goes up exponentially, right? So it's not like a straight line. The more code you've got in your product, the harder it is to change. Then we're looking at having lower risk and moving to higher risk. And one of the things that's really important in using design thinking and agile together is knowing that you have to have milestones for when you pivot or for when you persevere, right? Because you might have a hypothesis that you're busy, or you might have an idea, but then you realize once you've tested with your customers that it's actually not going to work. So, and you better do that before you get to code. So the earlier in the process it is, the easier it is to pivot. The later it is, the harder it is to let go, and hence the term sunk cost bias, right? We've spent a lot of money, we're going to keep going until we make it succeed. So, and ST leaves on the slide. The wrong order. All right, so if we look at user experience design and design thinking against Agile as a methodology, the one falls into the desirability, but the other one falls more into the feasibility aspect of it. Now, it doesn't mean that they are mutually exclusive in terms of the things that we focus on. It's just that there's a trade-off, right? So when we begin, there's a chair for you there. Welcome. So design thinking and UX design are amazing while we don't know things. It's a wonderful exploration to validate our assumptions and learn more about the environment we're working in. And it's focused on doing the right thing. So there's no use at being efficient at something that is not the right thing to do, right? So it's the effectiveness versus efficiency. Whereas for me, agile methodology, now that we know better, we can focus on doing things right. So we become more efficient and we move better. So we look at our sprints and we plan the things, because we now have a better understanding of the market. And all of these things, as you remember in the lovely Venn diagram, there are comments coming through.
It was the AI.
Oh, AI on everything, like a source. So now, and all of these things have to be supported by financial sustainability, because at the end of the day, the amount of money that you have to do research and the amount of money you have to do the development is defined by how much money the organization has to spend on it. So, moving away from the SD slide, does anyone have online any questions, or there are new messages? I just want to see what they are. So, in the basic article and
The AI.
oh, why, Larry? Why? So, did anything stand out for you? Was there anything that conflicts with your current environment or matches? Is there anything that,
So this might be a dumb question, but like
no such thing?
the whole favoring a working product over comprehensive documentation.
Ah.
So it's always tough to do documentation when as you're designing and stuff. Like where do you strike that balance? You know what I mean? If we're going directly to what like Agile was saying, like how do you find the balance between still doing documentation, but also concentrating on like making something work?
It's a very, very good question, and it's not an easy one to answer. And it's going to very much depend on the environment that you're working in. Does anybody else want to contribute to the answer before I say anything? Jay.
So what I would say, like to her, like documentation is first, because that's where you actually draw up on what the solution is. That's your planning. So from our side, we basically have like some technical documentation first, right? Where we have all of these diagrams, trying to see what's needed, what's going to work, what's not. After you're done with that, then you can basically go into the practical kind of solutions, right? But like as much as you will get some errors that you do not plan about, but at least you have something that there's a common goal. Get what I'm saying? Even if you implement something as you go, but you know that, okay, cool, this was my plan. So like now plan B, let's just put this in there. So documentation would be number one. I'm saying this as a developer, and then us as developers, we don't really like to do documenting. Yeah.
So it's a very valid point. And I think a lot of it will very much depend on the maturity of the organization. So in terms of UX itself, right? Or whatever your agility level is. So to what degree you practice Agile as a methodology, I think that's the other thing. So if you're a startup, right, and you're busy building a new concept, all you need to do is a mirror board. Right, that's what we do. Is we create a massive whiteboard and we dump our ideas, we do the research, we go stuff in there until it begins to take shape, right? But it is still a form of documentation. So writing things down, whether it is on a whiteboard, whether it is somewhere, you have to have what it
It's like one of the comments.
A comment said, get AI to do the documentation.
Nice one. So I mean, I talk to ChatGPT because I clearly have a lot to say, and then when I want to brief it on what it needs to do, the typing just takes it out of me. So, but I think it's important to understand what the goal is, and we're going to talk about assumptions a little bit later and how to work with those and what you can do in terms of being lean and meeting some kind of a middle ground, because design thinking is very heavy. You have to go do the things, you have to, right, and it can be as heavy as you need it to be, but the question is, what is your environment, and I'll also share in a case study how we did our documentation, so you can see it's a bit more lean.
Thanks.
So, cool. Any questions, anything that stood out for anybody, anything else? Cool. Anyone online besides the AI? Right, so now let's talk about traditional versus lean UX design. So also another thing that I really believe that is separated in our industry is we need to separate the titles of UI and UX designers. The thing is, UX is the overall experience that I'm having. Or I'm I'm not a user right now. I'm a facilitator right now, but I'm using this and this, and there's a delayed thing. So everyone in this room and online is having an experience. It is something that happens, right? The question is, did we design that experience or didn't we design that experience? And that's where sort of UX as a term of user experience abbreviation is almost a little bit misleading. It should be UXD or it should be UED because it's the act of designing. That is what we'll do as designers. So let's talk about the ideal world, right? So in an ideal world, when we create value for our customers, we strive to fulfill all of these needs. So like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there are different orders to what a user needs. And this was developed by Aaron Walton. So I'm going to use a frying pan as an example. I like using frying pans to threaten people and as examples. So at its very foundation, the first order of a frying pan is fry things, right? So it needs to do so. That's why we bought it. The second level is it must do it reliably. So that means that it can't fry it one day and not fry it the next day. The handle can't be coming off the one day and be on the next day, right? So we expect reliability. So you've used an app once, you've delivered the value, you want it to do so consistently. The third layer is it must be usable. So you don't want to have to use a glove to pick up the frying pan. The handle must be ergonomically, sorted. It must be comfortable, it must be nice. But the stuff that actually really makes a product is whether or not, if you're a chef and you really take pride in your food, like Caitie and I do, and you're making food for somebody, that this frying pan can deliver the perfect pancake, if that's what you're making, or the perfect butternut curry, or whatever it is that you're cooking. And that is the emotional value that I get out of it. It's not the functional thing that makes me purchase a product over and over. And we know that the 20th century is over. People don't buy products and services, they buy experiences now. That's what we're all looking for. So that is the ideal world. Now, the reality is that we work with limited budgets, right? So who has been on a team or on a product development cycle or product project where we sat around the boardroom and we said we need to do everything for everybody all the time. And we have this long, massive backlog of requirements, right? And we've done the grooming and we're now going to go do this thing, and we're going to put 20,000 things in the first sprint and measure velocity. So what we then end up doing with this limited budget is we end up using all of that money just on a portion of the functional things. So when we go live, we don't have something that works consistently. We don't have something that's useful and lacquer to look at and lacquer to work with. It doesn't deliver my pancakes, right? So what then was built as a model is the concept of a minimal viable product, the MVP. But as one of the lecturers on the IXDF UX management course, I think he's the main lecturer, he said he likes the minimal usable product. I love that from a designer's perspective. So before it can be viable, it must be usable. People must like it. People must buy it. So what we then do is we take that budget and instead of spreading it across all the functional requirements, we understand what are the key things that we could develop right now. What can we do that will be functional, reliable, usable, and deliver emotional value to our customers so that they buy it, so that we can get more money and then go and build another set of features and another set of features. Does that make sense to everyone? Right. Now, it's easier said than done because you're dealing with stakeholders, you're dealing with people who are expecting results, and everybody wants everything all the time. But this is the approach that makes it more sound from a sustainability, like as a growth and business perspective. Any thoughts, feelings, concerns? Yes.
What about the trade-offs? So like, where do you draw the line?
Which trade-offs?
Yeah, so let's say we're selling razors
Uh-huh.
and the emotional, I don't know how you can emotionally sell a razor, I guess.
I've got smooth legs.
Okay.
Yes, and I look great, and there's no cuts there, and I can use it easily, and I can do it quickly. How's that?
And maybe the way that it feels in your hand is nice, and it makes you have it like you enjoy using it, and makes you feel good. You feel a bit pampered.
Yes. So you might not go and launch 20 different razors. You might focus on one specific niche market that is unmet, or needs are unmet. And you have to understand competing by price, you're just stacking on top of other things. I don't know how creative you can get with razors, but
Think of the minimum viable product of a razor being like the Bic razor.
the big blue or orange one. Yeah, that's an E of a razor. But obviously it delivers a function and is reliable. It might not be the most delightful product you've ever used, but does that answer your question? I think if you have like an example in terms of a product, we can chat about that as well if you think of something, right? Like a digital product. So now when we look at, this is a failed slide. I'm just going to, there's no headings. There we go. Learning to present in Figma. So between traditional user experience design and lean user experience design as methods to play in a desirability space, right? Understanding our customers. They have a lot of shared things. We focus on the users. Where are they? Who are they? What do they do? How do they do it, right? But the way that we go about it is a little bit different, right? So design thinking and the more traditional UX methods focus on product level hypothesis. Should we start this at all? Is there really a need in the market? Now, in most organizations, that is not where we start. We start with like, I saw Capitec do this. Therefore, we must now go do this at this bank, right? So we try and steal features and we try and steal sort of behaviors from other companies because an executive in the room liked it, right? So we end up then, so it's very difficult to go and do product level hypothesis in that environment. It's hard to go and do the research and go through the entire cycle to really understand what the problem is. And then, so what traditional UX does is it gives you input for the entire process. So if you can do your research before you begin the design and you really go and do contextual interviews, observations, it gives you a lot of input for the whole process. But what it also means is it gives you a lot of upfront requirements gathering. You have to give detailed documentation and so on. And there just isn't time for that, especially if we are developing Agile. That sounds wrong. Don't judge me.
Agile.
So if you're trying to practice agility, there we go. Right. So now with Lean UX, what's cool about it, right? And it's not simple. Don't get me wrong, this is not a simple process. And you have to really know what's in your toolbox to do this well. You have to understand, in my view, personally, you have to go through this first to understand what is the full cycle before you become good at picking the right things at the right time, because it's experience that gives you that, right? So in Lean UX design, we don't go and look at the whole massive picture. We've got a backlog, it's been groomed, we have to now go and start developing. So what we focus on is what is under design in this sprint in particular. How do we now go and validate this for the users? How do we learn more about this feature in this sprint? In order to do that, we have to make assumptions of what is true. So who has ever made an assumption statement in design? Cool. So it's something that we do all the time. A lot of the things that we say and think are assumptions. But anyway, in Lean UX, we form hypotheses based on these assumptions. Now, let's talk about assumptions and not the same. Assumptions making. So the cool thing about assumptions is when we don't know and we don't have the information about the environment, the customer, the user, they allow us to make progress with limited information. And that's really useful because if you don't have the time, you don't have the time. And speaking of time, still got time. Right? Yes. So it creates a foundation. So you can write something down, as Jay was saying. You have to have a basic requirement. You have to have a basic statement of what you're going to do, because it allows you to bring everybody in the room onto the same page. You write it on the board, you write it in the document on the screen, but everybody then agrees that this is what we're assuming, and that is the foundation for the decisions we're going to make going forward. The second thing is, as I said, unfortunately, assumptions are rooted. It's a pause. Unfortunately, assumptions, fortunately and unfortunately, really, we're not getting on today. What is going on? So, sorry about that, guys. Okay, so the second thing about assumptions is that they're rooted in past experiences, and they're usually based on our own biases as users of something else. So I say I don't like bold text, and Caitie says it reminds her of Calibri, and then we settle on semi-bold anyway. So it's a lot to do with intuition and personal bias, right? So, and then in design, the sad thing is, or the dangerous thing is that often people, design by committee. Who's heard that phrase, right? So when we design by committee and all of us sit around the table, we bring our own experiences into the space, which is really great when you've got a very clearly defined problem statement. But it's a problem when you don't. It's a problem when you haven't had exposure to the actual users and left the office and understood what they're going through, right? So what happens is we argue around things, but we don't actually have tangible evidence to prove our point, other than our own biases, right? So what do we do then? So the key here is to, when you're sitting in a development cycle or when you're sitting in a design cycle and you're around the table and there's disagreement, the best thing to do is to surface the assumptions and to write them out and make sure that you actually state something that everybody is assuming collectively. And that way you can then go and say, what do we do next? If we're assuming this, what do we do next? And Caitie's going to tell you a lovely story about assumptions. So I'm going to hand over to her for practical tools and advocacy. Thank you. And have some water. Hi, everyone.
So yeah, I'm, as Vicka said, let me just take a break.
You exhale, inhale, exhale.
All right, so we've learned a lot about the kind of theory, a lot about the methodologies, but how do you actually apply all of that in your day-to-day life? So speaking about assumptions, it's this fountain.
Yes, and it's this clicking.
And it's very slow. So speaking about assumptions, here are just some categories of assumptions that you could test. I'm not going to go through all of them, but when kind of thinking about the work that you're doing, it's a good idea to look at these sort of categories and say, maybe it's culture. You write down specifically, I'm designing something for this culture, this group of people, and I'm assuming that they have the same understanding of color theory that I have. Maybe they don't, but maybe they do. I'm assuming that, I'm writing it down, and that means that I know I need to go and test that because it's an assumption that I've made. When you clearly state your assumptions, it makes it really easy to then know what to look out for when you do go into usability testing, when you do get the opportunity to speak to your users. It kind of gives you a kind of roadmap of where to go.
Oh, sorry.
No, all good. So the goal here is not to kind of make this exhaustive list and know absolutely everything that you are looking for. It's just to state the things that you're aware of so that they don't creep up and give you a big surprise. So an example of how that didn't go so well is with technological constraints. So I worked on a project, this is more of like a tech-focused example rather than design, but I worked on a project where we were running an activation in a stadium, And our assumption was there's not great cell phone reception in stadiums when it's full of people, but you know what? I've been able to send a message when I was in a stadium before. It's going to be okay. We actually went to one of the stadiums when it was empty, and we were like, oh yeah, there is signal here. We knew it was going to be a problem, but we didn't anticipate that it was going to be a complete catastrophic failure where there was no cell phone reception at all. We had designed it so that there was kind of like minimal things. So whatever graphics we had, they were embedded SVGs. We kind of reduced how many calls it needed to make, but it still needed to connect to the internet, and it couldn't. So the people running the activation were getting shouted at by the people who were trying to do the thing with the activation. It was just a mess. So we ended up actually having to install satellite internet at a stadium and then like put routers around the activation area. It was a whole thing. And it cost a lot of money, where we could have actually come up with a really simple solution where we didn't need internet access. It could have all been done locally on a router, but not connected to the internet, something like that. So just kind of clearly stating your assumption, that could have kind of saved us, where we could have been like, you know what, maybe it is actually going to be a bigger problem than what we're kind of trying to avoid here. So how do you?
No, I was going to say that's where that saying assumption is the mother of all. Comes in.
So once you've got your list of assumptions, then you turn them into hypotheses. So you state them and you validate them. You state them by stating what your assumption is, why it's important, who it's important to, what we expect to achieve, and what evidence do we need that this hypothesis is correct or incorrect. So an example of that, this is from IXDF. We can kind of break this down. So we believe that enabling people to save their progress at any time is essential. That's the assumption. For smartphone users, that's who it affects. This will achieve a higher level of sign-up completions. That's why it matters. And that's also the outcome that they expect from that. And then we will have demonstrated this when we can measure an improvement of the current completion rate of 20%. So that's what evidence you need to actually validate your assumption. That's how you tell, is my hypothesis correct or not? So making something super testable allows you to kind of, yeah, keep track of those things. So in all of this, it's great. We know how to map our assumptions. We understand what the design thinking process is. We have all of these tools, but how do we actually get to use the tools that we've learned? It can be really hard to advocate for UX design and to explain why it's important to people who don't necessarily want to understand, or they just haven't had experience with it. So a few tips to kind of deal with that is, firstly, start asking business-driven questions. This not only shows the people that you're working with that you are thinking with a business mind, it also helps you kind of step into their shoes, understand what they're considering, what's important to them, for you to be able to make better, more strategic decisions. It frames UX as a strategy tool rather than just something that makes everything look pretty. Next is using terms that business and developers care about. So don't go in talking about affinity mapping, talking about all of these big words that we understand and we've learned about, but nobody, the BAs don't know. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Developers maybe don't know either. Use terms that they understand and that they resonate with, so they can relate to what you're talking about. Things like metrics, goals, trade-offs, the words that they're using every day, it then allows the decisions that you're making to be relatable to them. Then also reframing design as behavior change. So when you talk about your work, don't talk about the actual work that you're doing. Talk about the outcome of the work that you're doing. So showing that what you do actually adds value. Don't say, or I'm not going to say don't say, but rather than saying, I redesigned this whole page, you could instead say, we reduced the number of steps in the process, which helped customers complete the booking 30 seconds faster. This immediately tells business what they want. They want customers to go through the process. They want it to be seamless. They don't care that you change the layout. They care what the outcome is. Then tell a story. So storytelling is really important. Starting with what's most important to somebody to hook them in, telling them, as I said before, the thing that they care about first before getting into the nitty-gritty details. So kind of taking them on this journey helps them to relate to things. It helps them to anyone, not necessarily just business people, but yeah, it really kind of, yeah, takes them on a journey.
Can I tell my story?
You can tell your story.
So as I was putting this together, or we were putting this together. So who's a fan of Stephen Bartlett's Diary of the CEO, right? So I love his stuff, and a lot of the time I watch the, go through the carousels on LinkedIn. And for months on end, I've been feeling triggered about, it's a silly thing to be triggered about, but the fact that there's red text on black, right? So, and I don't know if you're familiar with, and I had to go back and chat to ChatGPT and figure out whether that's chromatic aberration from a usability terminology point of view or chromastereopsis. But about a week ago, I decided that I want to write a letter to him. And I said, like, listen, I'm such a fan, but this chromastereopsis is like getting to me, So I start explaining what it is, right? And I say, okay, so I start typing this message very self-righteously. And I'm going to now tell them how to design. And then I say, the chromastereopsis is this effect that creates this blurred vision when you look at red on black or blue and red and so on. And so anyway, and then I'm like, but why should he care? Like, I go into the technical detail because I automatically feel like I need to justify whatever it is that I want to say. And I think a lot of the time we kind of do that because I get passionate about what I do and I love what I do and I love the technical backing of some of the things that I do know, So, and then I thought to myself, no, that's not the way to start an email. Like, listen, I'm a huge fan and I just want to let you know that some people may really struggle to read your content because it's red on black. And this is what the effect is called. And especially those with visual impairment, right? Because it's a bad accessibility practice. And then I went into the whole thing. Needless to say, my message hasn't been read and nothing's changed. I had to try. So in telling a story, what is the impact first, right? Why does it matter? And then the rest of the stuff that we bring as the explanation.
So next up is involving your stakeholders. So bringing people into your process early, showing them how you work, showing them why the work that you do is important, and showing the value that you can provide with the work that you're doing. So an example would be getting a BA to come with you on a usability testing session, allowing people who don't normally get to see the practice of UX, allowing them to see how impactful it can be to actually speak to a user and understand their experience of something can really help you to kind of show your organization and change the culture of your organization potentially. Maybe I'm thinking a little bit big, but it kind of it shifts the story of what UX is, that it is something of value, it is something really strategic. It's not just how is this laid out, what does it look like, all of that. And then lastly is to teach by doing. So kind of goes along with the previous point, but thinking of today and thinking of tomorrow, what could you start doing? What kind of small little UX experiment could you start on your own? Could you maybe get somebody to actually walk through the form instead of just looking at it in Figma? Get them to interact with it. Get them to kind of, you facilitate them having the experience of a user and understanding why that's important. Yeah, also getting out of the office. So potentially going to a similar place to where what you're going to be doing is, what you're building is going to be used. is really an effective way to kind of get into the shoes of the user, understand them a little bit better. And then this is something that Vicka said to me very early on when we started working together. And it's something I think about very often. It's very freeing. Design is a hypothesis until it has been tested with its intended users. So any decision that you make, you don't know if that's a good decision or a bad decision or a better decision than the decision you made last week. If none of those decisions have been tested, you just don't know. And it's also, it's a very, as I said, it's a freeing thing because it also helps with getting feedback. So like Vicka was saying, when you kind of have that design by committee situation and everyone is saying, I think this will work better and I think that will work better. Sure, maybe it will. Those are all hypotheses. You need to test them. And just because this person has more experience, they're not the user. So test everything. And it also helps you to be less attached to what you're doing because it's not I was wrong. It was my hypothesis was wrong.